this has been this is organized by Prabha Khaitan Foundation in association with Sri Cement, Radisson Blue Nagpur as our venue partner and media partner Lokmat, and is presented by SR's Women of Nagpur, Jyotika Kapoor, Parveen Tuli, Monica Bhagwagar, and me, Priyanka Kothari. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is an NGO based out of Kolkata, which curates live conversation series with the brightest and the boldest creative minds from the field of art, dance, music, television, movie, literature, and different art forms from all over India for select guests across 35 cities, India and overseas. Ever since the pandemic hit, we moved to the virtual sessions to keep up the morale of the artists and the patrons alike. Write Circle is one such initiative where literary enthusiasts interact with their favorite English author. And today's author, Mr. Palash Krishna Mehrotra, is one such critically acclaimed author. Born in Mumbai, graduated from Stephens College, Delhi, went on to do his master's from Oxford. His first book, Unit Park, takes us to that another world underneath the one we live in. It was finalist for the Shakti Bhatt First Book Prize and Hindu Prize for Fiction. His second book, The Butterfly Generation, explores the lives and the vibes of the millennials. It was a finalist for Crossword Book Prize. He is the editor of two anthologies, Recess and the recent one, The House Spirit. He writes regularly for columns for Mail Today, Sunday, Daily O, Mail Online India, Catch News, and Man's World. His bylines have appeared in almost all national dailies and many international newspapers. In his writing, he combines personal reflection and social observation to explore the India rarely acknowledged. The moderator for today is Mrs. Jyotika Kapoor. I request you all to keep yourself mute during the conversation and sit back and enjoy. Thank you.
Should I also mute myself? Should I also mute myself?
You keep yourself unmuted.
Okay.
So your volume is little low. Can you just increase the volume, or there is some problem with the microphone or something?
I got another issue Wi-Fi set, but that doesn't seem to be connecting. So we have to make do with this. Is this better?
Better. Much better.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, Priyanka. So here we, go on with the interview session with Mr. Palash Mehrotra. Thank you so much, sir, for coming over and sparing your time for all of us here.
Thank you so much.
So we all got to know that you got your degree in PPE, which is philosophy, politics, and economics.
Yes.
You chose your subjects related to society, ideas, and human beings.
Yes.
So how much it all has contributed in your writings?
Yes, I think I think it was I was quite sure from early on that I wanted to write, and it wasn't so much that I drifted into writing as I genuinely wanted to be a writer, and this is one of the oldest degrees, and any good degree in the humanities does open you up to currents of thought, and it does train you to look at society, to understand people, to understand psychologies of individual and society. And it was great because I went to a school in Allahabad, an ICSE school in Allahabad, and in small towns what happens is that there's this stereotype that the girls' schools have arts, but the boys' schools don't have arts because at least in the 90s. And so I was forced to. I didn't want to do science, and I was forced to take commerce, which was hardly of much interest to me, and especially in what I wanted to do later. But one goes through it. And then as soon as I could get out of school, I went to St. Stephen's. I did philosophy, and philosophy is a very abstract discipline, but it gave me a good training. It's a
Right.
good training of the mind. We did Indian philosophy, we did Western philosophy. So and then after that, I felt from that realm of abstract thought, it might be nice to just go straight into studying society. And so I crossed the road from St. Stephen's to Delhi School of Economics, which had an excellent course in sociology. And then
Mm-hmm.
sociology really kind of, it sank in, because it was suddenly real people we were talking about. There was sociology of India 1, sociology of India 2. So you understood your own society, you understood other societies. And it was moving from the abstract to the specific, from philosophy to sociology slash social anthropology. It was a very exciting time. And then I went to Oxford, where I could combine the two, where I could combine philosophy with sociology. And at that point, you're at a crossroads, because, well, you've been exposed to all the subjects, but now, do you want to be an independent writer, or do you want to become an academic? Excuse me. Which would mean that you choose one specialization, and then you teach at a university. But I didn't particularly want to do that. I just wanted to be a writer on my own 2 feet, and have that independence of voice, rather than be constrained by a university department or by disciplinary boundaries. And so gradually, yeah, I mean, it's fairly daunting at that stage, because, if you go into academics, there is a certain guarantee. I mean, you have a career, and when you decide to be an independent writer, well, it's just going to be you and your writing, and how people respond to it. But I took the plunge, and I haven't made much money, but I'm quite happy I took the plunge. So yeah, I mean, it gives me a lot of satisfaction. Yeah.
So you are doing the thing which is very close to your heart. That's
Most
that's
certainly.
really wonderful to know. Yeah,
Yes,
that's very
definitely.
wonderful to know.
Definitely.
On the same line, my next question to you is, okay, before the next question, there are some, messages in the chat box which are coming.
Okay.
If you can increase your volume or speak a little louder, because audience are not very, the voice is not very much clear. It's low. So
It might.
if you
Yeah.
can be a little louder.
Okay. 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 Is this
Yeah,
better? Is this better?
this is better.
Okay, now I
Perfect.
can't see the messages. I've done one Zoom thing with someone else, but I can't. Where usually it's on the right hand side.
Messages, we can see the messages here. At least I can see, so I will let you know what the messages are coming.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, now I can see the chat thing.
yeah,
Right, 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 right. Huh.
right.
It's
Yeah,
at the bottom. Okay, yes. Please
yeah.
be louder. Too low voice. Volume increased. I hope this is better now.
This is better now,
So sorry,
definitely.
yeah, I got these Wi-Fi earphones, but they don't seem to be connecting. So we have to make do with this. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
That's okay, sir. We
yeah.
all are now, comfortable with all these small glitches because of the technical issues
Yes,
in
yes,
these
yes,
digital
yes,
programs. So that's
yes.
completely
No,
okay with all of
as long
us.
as long as you
So,
can hear me. Yeah, I can hear you very clearly. And now I can
yeah.
see the chats also. Yeah. All right.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
So the next question I will take up is, like you mentioned about the courses, what you have done, and how you shifted from one university to
Yeah.
another, and went on to
Yeah.
are in schools and colleges.
Yeah.
It helps in connecting with
Yes.
you, or maybe
I think there's a bit of the connection sort of. I can't hear you. Your voice is breaking, Jyoti. Oh, I see. The Wi-Fi earphones were actually working. Okay, but I could not hear.
unlearning the stuff what you have learned with you.
Yeah, Jyoti, I can't hear you. There's a signal problem, because the voice is breaking. I think there's something with the internet. So can you please repeat?
Jyoti, if you could turn off your video and try your audio and then carry on with the conversation, I feel.
Yeah, I could hear that, but I can't hear Jyoti. Mhm.
I believe there is some internet issue with her. Priyanka,
Okay.
why don't you take over till the time Jyoti joins in. Or Parveen, you could
Yeah.
take over.
She's
Anybody.
logging in
Yeah, hi.
again.
Yeah.
So we
Hi.
can. I heard Jyoti's questions. Hi, this is Parveen, and
Hi. Hi, Parveen.
what Jyoti was asking
Hello.
is, what was your learning allow? Was it more like unlearning the whole learning that you do
Yeah,
when you actually
sure, sure.
practically moved on with your experiences with what you've learned? So that
Yes.
was the question.
No, that's a lovely question. Absolutely. In fact, I edited. I think the unlearning happens as soon as you get out of school. And my first anthology, which was about 200 years of the Indian school experience, I actually dedicated it to my college professors because. I mean, first you have to unlearn what you learned, and you have to kind of de-school yourself. And I mean, school is good enough to take you to a certain stage and make you literate, but it's not really going to teach you so many other ways of thinking about the world, because in many ways Indian schools really close down your thinking abilities, and there is so much emphasis on examinations, all of that we know. And so you forget to question things. In fact, so when I went to do philosophy at St. Stephen's, I mean, that really, we were encouraged to ask a lot of questions in class. We had very small classrooms. I mean, we had about 8 9 people in every class, which means it was a very intimate a way of doing philosophy. And often we would end up under a tree, with a professor, and it was a lot of back and forth. And I think once you do all that, you sort of start exploring other disciplines. And when you decide to become a writer, it's very important to find your own voice, your own take on things. And so when you start doing that, you leave all of that behind. I mean, all of that stays with you. It's good training. But wait, man, wait. So I sorry, I just put it on silent, huh? So this what happens is that I think what happens is that you have to learn to let go of the academic jargon, because now, see, you move from school and you start doing sociology or whatever. I mean, there is a whole academic way of writing prose, which also kills the subject, and it kills the joy of writing and kills the joy of sentences. I mean, because academics just love using jargon and fancy words, and in a way they kind of make things incomprehensible. So the next step was, I had to be very careful that I didn't slip into the whole academia kind of thing, because I mean, academic prose is the most deadening thing in the world. And quality of prose, I mean, when you start doing literary writing, I mean, the music of sentences is so important. How you hear the language, the music of the language, all these things become so important. And so I think, and for that, I think it has nothing to do with the courses I did, really. Yeah, why is this not b- I don't understand. This is on mute. I have no idea. I'll just switch it off. So yeah. So I think, and that comes, so what you asked about unlearning, I mean, I think then that at some point you're on your own, you're not part of any course, you've done your education, and then you're just reading what you really like, so you discover your own authors whose prose one likes, and that is also a very exciting time, because one book leads you to another. I started reading American short fiction, and you gravitate, because even within literature there are so many forms. I mean, there's novels, there's non-fiction, there is short stories, there's poetry, and after you out of college, even while you're there, you also reading beyond the reading list, and you're discovering your favorite authors, whether it's Eudora Welty in America, or whether it is I mean, V.S. Naipaul, or whether it is Raymond Carver. I read a lot of American short fiction, read a lot of Jewish American fiction, Isaac Bashevis Singer. So I mean, literature takes you all over the place, and you read indiscriminately, and at some point you gravitate towards certain styles, and through those voices you begin to find your own voice. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely it does,
Right.
because that's very beautiful thing what you have mentioned. Still
Yes.
connected with the stuff what you have learned, but still
Yeah.
not, caging yourself with that only thought process
Exactly.
and thinking
Exactly.
beyond that and
Exactly.
finding your own way and path. That's
Exactly.
that's very beautiful share from
Yes.
your side.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
Jyoti.
that. And generally, writers or authors, they write novels like big ones with hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Yes.
And your book, Unique Park, is a collection of 15 stories of
Yes.
love and destruction.
Yes.
So what was the idea behind these short stories,
Yes.
and why short stories and not the novel?
Yes. I mean, I think I think there's it's almost like a pathology in India, this obsession we have with writing novels. I don't think any other society writes as many novels, especially in English, as we do. And I mean, I don't know I mean, I understand the urge to tell a story, but then everyone writes a novel, and you might have like tier one, tier two, tier three, like with ours, but
Right.
everyone's writing novels. Some people are writing thrillers. Anyway, it's nice. People want to tell stories, but here's the thing: if you want to tell stories, I mean, India has so many stories to tell that if you choose the short story form, it just allows you to tell far more stories, whereas if you write a novel, you're just going to stay with one thing. And and to be honest, I get bored with that, and it's not easy to write stories because every story you have to find a voice for that story, get into that story. Whereas with the novel, once you found a voice, you can just kind of, it's more like turning up for office every morning and furthering the chapter, and taking it to sort of the logical plot end. But I think I was just attracted to the short story form. I think there were several reasons. One, we have a very rich tradition of the short story in India. So one grew up reading sort of stories in Hindi, and then there's also America has a fantastic tradition that always attracted me. um, I just thought stories were more fun. I think everyone forgets that literature is really about having about entertaining yourself and the reader. And I mean, the serious things are addressed in the course of it, but you don't really, I think novels sometimes overestimate their own ambition, and then they will talk about nationalism and identity and the big themes, and the story just allows you to go into the smaller spaces, the smaller individual spaces, the little idiosyncrasies individuals have. um um I mean, I wrote a story about a teacher's daughter who gets caught cheating, or about some guys who are not homosexual, but they are dancing in a small town bar because women don't really come to these bars. I mean, there were so many interesting things, and I could go back to college. I could go to all the places that were familiar to me, because we often write about what is familiar to us. So I could write stories set in Allahabad. I could set them in Dehradun, set them in Bombay, set them in Delhi, set them in Delhi University. All these places were familiar to me, and I wanted to use all these experiences, especially in my first book. Um, but I think there's just a joy, and then some people become poets, some people like the novel form, some people love the story form. And I think one is very lucky that one is in India, where the story is taken seriously. In America, it's taken seriously. In England, it's not taken that seriously because they're obsessed with the novel. So different societies, different English speaking cultures have different attitudes. But and it's not that stories are not published in England. Alistair Gray is a fantastic Scottish short story writer who's influenced me deeply. But I think there was something about the story which I just couldn't find. And I think there is a point where your natural talent kind of tallies with a certain form, and which is not to say that there are writers who don't write, who write, and who don't write in all forms. But it is different, it is different. I think I just have a very restless mind, which and then the story form just suits that, because it kind of, and I don't like to tie up loose ends. And so I think stories mirror life. If you're interested in art being sort of faithful to life, or mirroring life, or being with any kind of accuracy, then I feel stories do it far better than, say, novels, which have a touch of the artificial and the synthetic. I mean, ultimately it's artifice, but a story can really make you feel that it's taken you right into that moment. And also the insignificant moments, but I think literature should always be interested in what others think is insignificant, which might be significant for the individual, or the individual might not even realize. So it's I was also interested in exploring these insignificances, or so-called insignificances, which I feel the story form allowed me to do a better. But it's not an easy form, because people often, readers get it, but editors often don't get the story form. And they want the story to end in a kind of nice complete way, as if it's a novel. Strangely, I've had this experience that with readers I've never had a problem, but with
Uh-huh.
editors, they feel, oh, but but will the reader feel this now, should we?
Uh-huh.
And so stories can be tricky that way, and I feel stories and story writers should be allowed to use their own. With novels, I think you can edit and you can change things and introduce characters, but in a story there's not that much space, and I don't believe in heavily editing short stories, because I think
Uh-huh.
the story writer's instinct is to be trusted more than say the editors. Sorry, yeah. So
No,
something.
no, that's completely true
Yeah,
what you said. Coming up with the idea and putting it in the way
yeah,
it is coming up without molding it too much and giving
yeah.
the point across to the audience in a
Yes,
short form.
yes,
That's a
yes,
beautiful thing.
yes,
So, as your unique park is a combination of 15 stories. So,
yes,
we spoke about, you mentioned about short stories, why you like stories, and
yeah,
novels, not going into the novels.
yeah.
What was the idea behind Unique Park? What motivated to you to create this unique park?
I think what happened was that I wrote one story. Then I wrote the first two stories, and then I just sat on them for a year. I didn't tell anyone, because that's how you begin, and it's a strange. I mean, people kind of keep it secret. I didn't show it to my. Excuse me. I mean, I knew some writers. My father's a writer. I didn't show it to anyone. I kind of sat on these stories for about a year, and then I don't know, and then I went back to them, and I felt, hey, they're not bad, and I want to write some more stories. And so it happened very naturally. And I think after I had four stories or so, I I felt, yeah, I mean, four or five stories, five stories. I should send them to an editor, Dia Hazra, who was at Penguin India then, and she really liked those stories, and I had this anthology idea in mind, because I was teaching at Doon School, and I thought that no one has done a history of Indian school days, an anthology, historical anthology. So I sent her that idea, and often sometimes these things happen like that, and she liked those stories. And then, I mean, there was this sense that if I had a contract, this could be a book, and I could add more stories to it. And those she liked those stories enough, and so I can't thank her enough, because she was the one who saw my talent, signed me on with just five stories and no book to my name, and then said, just go for it. And then I sat down and wrote maybe 10 more stories, and the latter half of the book was very much written like a book, because I was writing it like a book. So I would finish one story, take a break, and then move to the next story, then take a break, move to the next story. I mean, every story was planned out like the chapter of a novel. So I think the first five stories kind of came in a slightly disconnected way, because those were the first few I wrote ever. And then once I had a contract, and these things are very important. If you're starting a literary career, you do need someone to see your talent, and to kind of give you that freedom. So I'm very grateful to Dia Hazra and to Penguin India for doing that, and I think that really helped me finish the book. And so, because after five, Dia also felt that, look, you can do a collection of stories, and I said, why not? And so that's how it fell into place eventually. And I had no expectations of it. So I was very surprised when it came out and touched a chord, especially with the younger readership, because you don't have any idea when you're writing, and
Right.
especially when you're starting out. I mean, you just
Right.
do it, and probably your first book is your always going to be your freshest, because you write it
Yeah.
with absolutely no expectation, and yeah, and absolutely fearless. I mean, you're not thinking about anything. I mean, you're just putting whatever you want to. And I think they always, first works of art always have that freshness. Readers also feel that nothing can match up to that. Anyway, sorry. So that is yeah, that is how I ended up. And I think the idea, to answer your question, the idea for the behind the book emerged later. That there was a certain link in those stories. These were sort of love stories, but with a dark edge, where the characters often went on downward spiral trajectories or became self-destructive. They were not very happy stories, but there was enough humor and there was enough realism. And so I think the theme gradually emerged, because there was a flavor, and as I wrote more stories, and when I finally saw those 15 stories, I think I think halfway through I had some sense, and then by the time I finished it, I was like, look, I think love and destruction, these two themes bind these stories. But I didn't initially set out with any theme in mind. So I think the theme really emerged in the writing, because a lot of things do happen when in the actual process of writing. So you can constantly write in your head, you can plan things and execute them, but things happen while you're doing the writing. And with Yunak Park, I think there was no big idea as such, but then it kind of kind of, later on, in the critical reception and the way readers approach it, it became known as this kind of covering the dark, seamy underbelly of India, and that became its kind of identifying marker. But when I was writing, I wasn't very aware of these things, and these things, because it's a matter of accretion. So you have 15 stories, and then you start seeing the themes. So yeah, that's how Yunak Park came about. I can't I think
Yeah.
have we lost Priyanka?
Priyanka, are you here?
I can hear Parveen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hi.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think has Jyoti gets disconnected again. Is
Yeah,
it?
I think. Priyanka, over to you.
Okay, then I'll just okay. So, like, is this your favorite? So, what's your favorite genre for that? Because these sounded like little underbelly, darkish
Yeah.
novels.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the underbelly thing, I think, is just kind of something that was slapped on, because, say, an elite college hostel is not really the underbelly. I mean, it can be called the underbelly because, well, I went into slums and things in some stories, and then it goes into sort of people into sort of petty crime and that kind of thing. But a lot of it was set in fairly mainstream, college hostels, or say the defense colony market in Delhi. But yeah, the seediness did come in, like, there would be hotels in Paharganj, and there's a couple in this Paharganj hotel. So yeah, I mean, you go to Okhla Basti, and one of the wonderful things about writing a story is, I mean, I used to go to that Basti a lot, and one of the things a writer does, I mean, is record things which will not exist. And I went there for a couple of years when I was working for tehelka.com, and I was fascinated by the place. And I also had this thing that I had to get Oxford out of my system, if I had to write about India. And otherwise, kind of, Oxford puts you in a very different state of mind. And when I came back from there, I mean, the slum became this sort of, I mean, it was a teeming township, and it was like, and I got to know a lot of people there, and and so I started writing about it, and looking back, I kind of feel happy I wrote about it, because that entire area, that entire Bangladeshi refugee settlement was cleared out. As we speak now, it doesn't exist. And so what I ended up capturing was something in the late 90s, 2000, this huge basti and this teeming life within it, which is all gone now. So if you read that story, it's a very long story called Okhla Basti in Yunak Park. I mean, you re-enter that world, and now this is how the things link. Now this is the material. I knew this was my material, and and say 20 years later, that place doesn't exist, and this is the only record of that place. But then how do you write about slums without looking down, or without sounding like you're highly educated and you're writing about slums? I mean, what helped me again? So my indiscriminate reading came to mind, and then I'd been very influenced by Zola, the French novelist. And so this is another point, that a short story writer can be influenced by a novelist, or a novelist can be influenced by a short story writer. There's nothing to prevent this exchange of creativity, or um, um, so I think the way Zola was writing about slums, I mean, I read his novels, a couple of them. I was very, very moved, and he took you right into that sort of, and it totally, I felt that this was exactly what Delhi was like in 2000, especially in that slum. And so I think a lot of my Zola kind of came in. It's not like you read Zola and then you write a sentence of your story. It's just something very impalpable that seeps into you. And I think Zola's writing had played a big role when I started writing about Okhla Basti.
Oh,
Uh,
that's
but but
interesting.
but not all stories. Some stories are set at universities. Yeah, I mean, so it's not that, all stories are not sort of the dark underbelly in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting to understand the concept of short stories and putting up the ideas and the
Yeah.
way you
Yeah.
express the entire thing.
Yeah.
So now that we spoke about Unique Park and short stories, let's
Hmm.
move to the another thing now.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the butterfly generation, the
Yeah.
journey from cassettes and the Maruti 800 to the age of internet?
Yes. No, that was a book that there was a plan. This was a very different book
Uh-huh.
from Eunuch Park. I mean, Eunuch Park, I
Yeah.
wrote stories and it kind of. Now this was a fully planned book because this is non-fiction, and there is, of course, and then by this time I'm working with an agent in London, Kevin Conroy Scott, who was very, very helpful in getting me a contract. And we decided, I told him, look, I want to, I mean, my stories, I'd been sent to the publishers, and I said the next book, I'm still kind of young enough, I'm in my early 30s, I mean, now I'm 45, and that book came out. So when the book was in my head, I think I was about 31, and I felt like I got in touch with him and I said, look, I want to do an India book. And then we spoke over the phone, we exchanged some ideas, and he said, you must do something about urban youth and young India, because you're young enough and this is the last chance. And do you think there is anything you can do about young India? Think of a through line, something that binds the book. And I said, well, there is something. And he said, think about your generation, and then write about India, but keeping something, don't do a general book on India. So I said, well, let me think about my generation and what makes my generation unique. Well, one of the things is that we grew up in a very socialist India of the 1980s. My father used to ride a Bajaj Chetak, and I mean, when you got a phone call, you had to go to your neighbor's house because you didn't have a phone,
Yeah.
and all these things. So
Right.
and what were we, where were we when, say 15 years ago? Things were just beginning to change in India. Laptops, mobile phones, coffee shops. I mean, in Dehradun, I saw, little Kirana stores come down and suddenly being replaced by glass. Now we take glass fronted showrooms so for granted.
Mhm.
But, even a coffee shop opening, a coffee chain opening, there was a sense of newness. There was a sense of economic optimism. The India was very young, and there was this sense of things are changing very dramatically for us. Suddenly we're jumping kind of technologies. Choices are opening up to us. Say even with music or cinema, you have now, through the internet, you have access to a lot of things which you didn't have earlier, where you relied on your video cassette pirate, who would produce a Hollywood kind of a pirated edition, camera print aata tha with so I mean,
Right.
so I
Yeah.
thought it would be fun. I thought there was a generation like me which had memories of growing up in an India like that, and it would be fun to write a part memoir and then kind of constantly keep coming back to the present, and just try and nail my generation, because you can only do that once, and then you grow older, but you've again left a record for the next generations. And in fact, there was a Ralph Emerson quote I'd used to introduce Butterfly, which I think sums it up, which says that in every generation, each age it is found must write its own books, or rather each generation for the next succeeding. So I think this was part of the ambition, that and then there's a Jim Morrison line, that each generation wants new symbols, new people, new names. They want to divorce themselves from their predecessors. So I think there was definitely a sense of newness then, and also of this generation emerging, coming of age in this Americanized India. And things had changed very rapidly. And so, yeah, I mean, so there was this kind of deep bilingualism also, where Indians were comfortable being Indian, but we were also kind of adopting American mores, and going to these coffee shops or discotheques. And these were not things finally for just for the small elite. This was, everyone had access to this now. And if you had a little bit of disposable income, you in your first job, I mean, you were exploring all these places, and so there was a sense of, now all that also we've kind of absorbed. So I think there was definitely a plan to writing Butterfly. but then, the story goes that I had a proposal which I worked on for a year with my publisher, so my agent. Then we sold that to a publisher in England and in India. But then the English, when I finally wrote the book again, your book changes when you go into the field. And I wrote some,
Right.
I met other, what I planned in my proposal, it didn't really work out that way, because when I went into the cities, I would arrive, say, in Bombay or Bangalore or Delhi without knowing anyone. I mean, I didn't know anyone. I'd, come back from Oxford. All my friends in college had left these cities to do the education abroad or whatever. So it was an interesting experience, slightly frightening, because I would arrive in these cities, and I was coming from Dehradun, and I didn't really know what had changed in the last 5 years. And then I had to I would just befriend people, young people, and I would just kind of tell them I'm writing a book, and someone would introduce me to someone, a filmmaker, no one really famous, no one famous then. I mean, these were people writing scripts in Warsaw. These were young script writers. I met them. Now they've become, well known. One of them has written this film called Gurgaon. The other one wrote a Assamese film called Amis. So, um, but in those days, I just met them, and just the idea was to become part of their lives, and not have a sense that you're putting them under a microscope. You yourself are putting yourself under the microscope, because you do whatever they are doing, and you essentially become part of their, and they allow you to become part of their narrative. And so that was the kind of new journalism style I was trying to do, which had been done in America, where you write nonfiction which is not full of statistics. I mean, some reviewers were baffled, and after that, a few books on Young India that came were full of statistics, because people feel, but statistics are boring. If you're a literary writer, if you can observe things, if you have that literary ability, you can do a more impressionistic account, which is far more entertaining to do and for the reader. So yeah, there was a lot of me in that, and a lot of these other people, and our lives intermeshing, and remembering the past, and immersing yourself completely in the present, and all what's and all. So it's not like, so I know my British editor said, but you've come back with, like, we want like stories of India becoming a kind of, superpower and things. And I had a story about a call center guy who dies, and he gets addicted to brown sugar. So I've always been interested in the not so happy side of things, because somehow that always attracts an artist or a writer, or it's far more interesting. It's more fascinating, the downside. So there were positive stories. I mean, this is not, these were real life stories. I mean, call center kids were dying as well. So there was a dark side. So yeah, I mean, I stood my ground, and so yeah, butterfly happened the way, I mean, that's the way it
So
happened. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's very beautiful. The true and honest way of how
Yeah.
butterfly generation came up, and the
Yeah.
quotes what you quoted right away in the beginning of this question was really, because
Yeah.
my next question was about to know the idea behind this and the vision what you visualized while writing butterfly generation, but
Yeah.
it came out very clearly in your detailing of this thing. And
Yes.
just wanted to know a little bit about Americanized Indians, what you mentioned. Why
Yes.
that particular term?
Yeah. I mean, there certain, there's definitely, I mean, it was all happening, but there was a certain, like bars opening in small towns, young couples opening these bars, women coming alone for a drink. All this was unheard of in the Allahabad I was growing up in. I mean,
Right.
once even my mother, during the Kumbh Mela, we had guests over, and they were at a hotel, and they said that we don't serve women. I mean, and we can't, we don't serve women drinks. Now, all this, this was happening. I experienced this, and then suddenly you see, young couples opening these places, whether they are cafes or whatever, and and these places became safe. I think India did change. I mean, I think Americanized, I meant, a slight of a more westernized, because globalization did bring that about. And the book also kind of, was about 1992, 93, when the Indian markets were opened up, and we were getting, and economic liberalization did lead to a sort of cultural liberalization. Let us also not underestimate then the power of cable and things. We didn't have Netflix and Amazon Prime. I mean, just
Right.
American cable
Yeah.
coming in. cable TV changed a lot of things. MTV had a certain influence on young Indians, which it doesn't now. I mean, MTV doesn't mean very much. I mean, you can watch videos on YouTube, but MTV, when it came in as a kind of flag waving American youth culture, and when Indians kind of fell in love with it. I remember this ad which used to come on, on MTV, where this guy has sideburns, and then he says, do you know what MTV did to me? It gave me silly sideburns. Why on earth would a guy in India have sideburns? Well, I have sideburns because I watch MTV, and then that was the
Right.
ad. I mean, so it was, but there was a sense of excitement. We had these VJs who were beaming in, some from India, some from, I think, Hong Kong, and they were very influential then. I mean, these guys meant a lot. Now all that is gone. So I think that's what I meant by American, the American influence coming in via cable and via the internet gradually. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah. And
So
so,
that was a
the ease
different
of
term
dating
altogether.
and the boy girl thing, being open about, say, homosexuality, the gay pride marches started happening in Delhi. Everyone would turn up. So this was a generation that's definitely different from its parents' generation. It didn't have a problem with these things. It was, saying,
Yeah.
look, we don't really, we don't want to be that conservative. So I think that was the kind of, those were the Americanized changes I was
Right.
talking about. And
Right.
so,
Absolutely
yeah,
got that.
yeah,
And as we have very limited time with us, I'll
yeah,
move to next two questions, and then
yeah,
we will open the floor
sure,
for the audience to put in
sure,
their questions.
sure.
So I now move to the next one. Can you just give us a sneak peek on your anthologies? We have not spoken
Yeah,
about that yet.
yeah. No, so this is well, I've edited two anthologies. One is
Yeah.
the idea I got when I was teaching creative writing and philosophy at Doon School, and in fact, one of my students is there, former students, Dr. Ori. So yeah, so he attended my classes. So no, so I got the idea for doing the anthologies because I thought no one has really delved into, because school is something we all kind of either
Mhm.
move on, and everyone just says,
Yeah.
okay, now we've moved on from school, and then you stop thinking
Right.
about it, and then everyone just moves on, or some boarding school kids never can move on, so sorry, Ori. And like boarding school kids, like Doon school kids will meet each other and they will only talk about it. The Mayo kids will talk about that match in class 7, and then that goal that someone missed. I mean, I think there is definitely all of that, but I think the anthology wanted to just go back as far as we could find written records, mostly in autobiographies and memoirs, of the different experiences people had of going to school, from apart from the
Hmm.
obvious missionary and public schools and all that. There was a lot of stuff I found, because in anthology, once you start looking for something, you keep seeing it. And I would go to the school
Right.
library and I would go through memoirs, and I would always find these 3 pages with someone's account of going to school in India. And then once I started delving deeper, you had the Dalit memoirs. Now the Dalit memoirs will talk about all the going to upper caste schools and the kind of humiliation they suffered there. uh, you know so there's Om Prakash Valmiki, Juthan, a Dalit's life. There's a section from that, where they said ki if you wore nice clothes, they would call you a chuda. If you wore dirty clothes, they called you a chuda. It was very tough. But then I also found these accounts, which are about which are coming from sort of Brahmin schools, where you would learn how to chant. So the Indian school experience becomes very fascinating, because when you have the caste element at play, the Brahmins are having a very different experience of school, the Dalits are having a very different experience. Then you find memoirs where back 100 years ago, when women were married off very early, and you would have a young wife, and then the husband would be much older and he would homeschool his wife. He would teach her the alphabet and how to read and how to write in liberal houses. So I mean, once I started researching it, I found it's a very diverse experience of schooling. And the earliest records took me back to 200 years, to Lal Bihari Day and the coming of education in Calcutta. And um, and um, yeah, so I read a lot of memoirs, and so and of course then it comes to Tagore and Ramabai Ranade and Kripabai Satyanathan and Gandhi and R.K. Narayan. And yeah, it kind of gradually comes down to more recent times. Tenzin Sundiu has a lovely poem about going to school in a Tibetan refugee school. So
Mhm.
I thought, when you put these together, you do get a comprehensive sense of the diversity of the Indian school experience over 200 years through the eyes of various accounts that are already part of other accounts, but you have to look for them. So it was a very interesting anthology. It's a historical anthology, required a lot of
Right.
research.
Mhm.
So, and the
Yeah.
other one, yeah, if you're running out of time, so the other one was House Spirit, and House Spirit was a commissioned anthology. So it's not research. I mean, I these it, this I it, these were handpicked writers I really liked, and of course I wrote a long introduction. And this was more of a
Mhm.
fun anthology, but again, the dark side came in, and people have pieces about going to rehab, coming out of rehab. Vijay Nambisan, who sadly passed away after writing the piece, but he had this wonderful piece about how there is such a scam of rehabs where people are forced to go to rehabs in Kerala, and there's a huge scam going on there. I mean, you don't have an option, and you just kind of thrown it. So I mean, but this was a drinking anthology, so there was lots of Amit Chaudhary wrote about not drinking, and how odd that is when you go to a place and then everyone says, but why, and then how he wriggles out of it. So there was that. So we covered. I mean, I covered. And I mean, we Indians have a very hypocritical attitude to drinking. I mean, if you notice, so there was a lot of humor in the way we drink, because we, at one level, we pretend we don't drink. There's a slightly taboo. I mean, so a lot of people don't drink at home. Then you have the culture of karu bar, or like chicken points in small towns where people just go and drink in their cars. And I mean, nowhere else in the world you drink and drive, but in India there's a tradition of, like, you can't drink at home, so you just kind of drive around in your car while you're drinking. So I mean, it's we drink on an empty stomach. In England they have the dinner at 6:30, then they have a drink. We have the drink before the.
Mhm.
So I mean, there were all kinds of. And then I found some historical accounts as well, but mostly it's commissioned pieces. I mean, Gautam Bhatia was this lovely writer and architect. He wrote a fantastic piece about just discovering beer when you're like 13 years old. And there are 6 kids, and they've all gone to a friend's place, and it's a beautiful story. And there's one bottle of Golden Eagle beer or something, and no one has ever had a beer, and they're all looking at it. Like, who'll open this now? What will happen now? If I have one sip, will I go mad? And there is just one bottle, and 13-year-olds, and it's very funny. So it takes you back to your first experience. Kanika Gehlot wrote a wonderful piece about how things have changed for women in drinking, and how Delhi didn't have places, watering holes for women, and what it meant to be a woman in a kind of liberalized Delhi, where you had a disposable income, and you could go to these places which had opened, which were opening. Um, which were not there in Delhi earlier. So, and how drinking was connected with a kind of female liberation. That, I mean, she's writing about when she's in her 20s and early 30s. So I think, yeah, I mean, so that was the drinking anthology, which was it's got stories, it's got poems, it's got essays, and these were all written specially for the anthology. Then these are not things that you've seen earlier. And someone, Soumya Bhattacharya, where goes to Gujarat, and where you have to get a permit, and then it's all about drinking in that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's uh, India pretends it doesn't drink, but it's the world's largest whiskey consumer and all of that. So, when even recently during the lockdown, I mean, governments were losing so much revenue. So, we might have the taboos and the kind of prohibition tendency, but at the same time, we drink a fair bit. So I thought it
Yeah.
was, Renuka Chatterjee actually got in touch with me with this idea. Renuka
Mhm.
Chatterjee is the editor
Okay.
at Speaking Tiger, and she said, would you be interested in doing this? So that's how that came about. Yeah.
That's really great, and I'm sure these two anthologies are really an interesting read and very informative as well for for all
Yeah.
of us to
Yeah.
go and pick it up and just read and get the entire information what
Yeah.
from a writer's point of view, and then
Yeah.
not cage into that point of view and have our own opinions on that.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you so much for sharing that, and
Thanks.
I'll just go to the next question and maybe the last one because
Yeah.
we have a few questions from the audience. I'll
Okay.
ask Priyanka if we have.
Yeah.
And can you just share your views on the state of publishing today? And to add on to this question is any advices for the young writers here?
Yeah, I think the state of publishing is pretty dire, but I mean, it's you see, the problem in India is I think there's always a conveyor belt of people who can write a bit of English, and there will be no dearth of these. And then if publishers, I think publishers have stopped backing authors in the long run, because I mean, someone else will come, and then that will kind of get your job done, and which kind of is not the way it really works, but because a lot of these books are now sinking and none of these authors are being able to make any kind of readership of their own. But I mean, having said that, I mean, I'd say that just for younger writers, but at the same time, the self-publishing route has opened up, which is a very important way. If you have readership, no one can really prevent you from getting in touch with your readership, and I mean, they will pay you for it, and you will so that directly selling to the reader, I think, is the biggest change in the last few years, whether you do it via Amazon. And yeah, I think there is what used to happen earlier was that publishers would back certain writers, and then you might have a couple of failures, but you kind of wrote your fourth, fifth, sixth book, and the publishers, once they started backing you, they would continue backing you. I think that's kind of gone, and it's always some which is, I mean, which is I think, but it's still not preventing the reader, but it's preventing the author from taking the traditional publishing route. So I think more and more authors are just taking, publishing privately. And for younger writers, I just say this, like, I'm contributing editor short fiction at the Punch magazine, and I think there's a lot of impatience, and people nowadays expect something to just appear, because it's all digital. And if one edit takes some time and the other edit takes some time, and if there's a queue of pieces, then people get very impatient. And I get a lot of emails like, after 2 days of they've sent me something, they'll be like, but when is it coming out? Is it coming out tomorrow? Is it coming out day after? And you have to tell them, look, wait, the issue comes out once a month. And the other thing is, everyone's threatening that, look, I'll just put it on Facebook. And I'm trying to tell everyone, no, 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 don't put it on Facebook. Like, this is this thing, नहीं,
Uh-huh.
कोई नहीं कर रहा है, अगर तुम लोग इतना टाइम ले रहे हो, मैं Facebook पे डाल देता हूँ. I mean, just take it easy, I mean, there's no hurry to put it on Facebook. Why are you giving your content for free to Facebook? Facebook is never going to pay you. Facebook is just one jungle, but people are so
Yeah.
impatient. I think writers should be a little more patient. Writing is a slow process, and publishing is an even slower process. So this whole hurry and threatening the editor that I'm going to put it on Facebook is, I just find it a little cute. That's all. I mean, just take it easy, because Facebook at the end of the day is just Facebook. I mean, you can always do it, but yeah, I mean, I think just patience is one thing, and another thing is, I think people are I think revising your sentence, and not, there is a whole skill to cooking your sentence but not overcooking it. And you can't leave it undercooked. You have to cook it just to the right, and that is a thing you develop by instinct, even in the kitchen, in writing as well.
Right.
So when a lot of people are in the habit of spewing it out, and then they're like, it's done, well, it's not done. And then you have to learn by just reading what you like and developing an ear, and then you develop your own sense of ki isme namak zyada karna hai ki kam karna hai, now this is just right. So I think you need to spend some time revising your work and figuring out that exact kind of tightrope, where and that's the fun part of writing. I mean, we don't just write to blurt out the big idea. I mean, the process of writing, these little things, you will go back to that sentence, you will go for a walk, and you would have written something, and you will be thinking about that sentence, or you might be thinking about what to add after that, or to take away this word. I mean, right now I wrote a column for Hindu Blink, and just before I started this conversation, I wrote to my editor saying maybe we should drop the last sentence. And she said, yeah, I'll let you know, when I start editing it, because it's always there in your head. And so this editing process also slows you down, but it's the most beautiful part of writing. I mean, it's not just that you just kind of just blurt out your ideas, and that's just the first draft. It's always good to do that, but the writing never stops, and the process never stops, and that is a very pleasurable thing. I mean, you in your own, you've created this material, and now you aesthetically working on it to make it as beautiful or as effective as possible, and as entertaining for the reader. and you will just read your own, it's your own work, so don't feel bored reading it again and again and again. I mean, if you feel bored reading it again and again and again, don't expect the reader to. So I
Audience. Yeah.
think, I think one should, one should just enjoy one's own work and revise and stay with it. It's a beautiful parallel world we create ultimately and inhabit. And so I just feel people are a little too prolific nowadays. What I'm saying is कि वो 30 days में 30 poems निकाल देते हैं, which is like, if you look
Mhm.
at Philip Larkin and these people, they produce one slim volume of poems in 10 years. It's not that they were not great poets, but उनको 10 साल क्यों लगते थे और हम तो 30 days में हो रहे हैं. So I get a little worried about when people put out too much too quickly, and they themselves are not going back to what they've done to see. So I mean, you learn from observing your own stuff, which I think is something people miss out on, especially some younger writers. I'm not saying, but since
Yeah.
you asked.
Yeah, that's very great and wonderful advice for all the young writers. In fact, all the writers, just to look back at your work and try on improvising on
Yeah,
that stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
really wonderful. Thank you so
absolutely.
much for that. And now I will hand over to Priyanka. Priyanka, if we have any questions, can we take them up?
Yeah, we have a few before I give to the audience. I totally agree and struggle because I have a Dosco in my house, and they are here, and they are super impatient when it comes to creative writing. And
Yeah,
there are like this flash fiction. I think it's really harming
yeah,
the whole act of reading and writing as well.
yeah. No, there is a kind of instant gratification, and because it's so short. But then I suppose one can't complain, because things keep changing, and poetry, the form itself was always very, you could have 4 or 5 line poem which would say everything. And that is also something that the short story had, of compression, of not taking too much time to say something. And then compressing is an art, when you want to use as few and the most precise words possible to say something which is meaningful, or just a little quirky thing. So I think there is scope within that as well. But again, even if you're writing flash fiction, or even if you're doing sort of Instagram poetry, I still feel that it can be revised. Even those 3 5 lines can be played around with. In fact, all the more reason, because in a novel you can get away with loose sentences and a lot of space, to get lost. So even flash fiction and Instagram poetry, this should not be underestimated. It's just the form of the present. People are on these devices, and it's just a form that has been added on to what already existed. It's not that people have stopped reading novels and things. But to answer your question, I feel yes, people should be actually even more careful when you have 4 lines
Yeah.
to work with, because you have very few words to say what you want, and then it'll stick out like a sore thumb. So even if you're going short and brief, I think yeah, look at it
Super.
closely.
Thank you. So
Great.
I'll unmute Nivedita. She could ask a question.
Hey, hi. I'm just using audio because I'm on 4G.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Okay,
okay.
Just
okay.
wanted to ask two questions. One is about editing. Is it better to do self-editing or get somebody else to edit the work?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of editors around. A lot of agents also charge money to edit your book, and I just
Mhm.
think it's a money spinning racket. I think there are just a few agents, and they charge too much. And I've mentored so many writers, the first time authors. They don't necessarily have to be young. I mean, there are cancer survivors, Carol Hughes, Tommy Hazarika, who's just published a book recently. And I've been helping them in the sense they would often ask me about editors and all of this, and first time authors. And I feel a lot of them are, well, if you look at it from the agent's point of view, they also want to make money, but I think they end up kind of charging too much and not really, providing you that kind of quality editing. So I would really suggest, in India at least, I think it's better to edit oneself. But sorry, what was the question again? There was something very important I wanted to say about the editing. Yeah, I think um, 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 I mean, sometimes the editor charges more than the advance the publisher is going to give you, So I just find that whole thing, the editor is making some, 50 grand just to edit, and then, your advance will be like 25,000 rupees, if at all. So I just feel you have to be a little careful in India because it's not yet a fully formed market. I mean, in Rupa, they once sent my book Butterfly Generation for editing to Taiwan or somewhere. And I was like, why are you doing this? And they paid 25,000 rupees to someone in Taiwan to edit it. And I never even looked at those editors. Nice of them to do that. But I just feel yeah, I mean, I think I think I think I think there are two ways. I mean, one, you're talking about linguistic editing. I think that is if you feel the need, you can. But if you get a book contract, the publisher will do all that for you. So you know but I personally don't like editors interfering too much with my sentences or my thoughts, and so that makes it difficult to publish. But I'm okay with it because, look, I mean, it takes a long time for something to fall into place. I will struggle with it for 5 years, and it comes out, and then someone just reads it and just says, change this, change that, change this, change that. It doesn't really work like that. And so I'm not a great one for although, which is not to underestimate the power of editing. It's best to actually one develops literary friendships, and if you have a literary friendship with someone you really trust, and I think that sort of thing works much better than sending it to some professional editor who will just read it as a kind of. But failing anything, other options, I mean, I'm sure it helps. But yeah, I'm just a bit wary of Indian editors, at least.
And my second question was, like, when we talk about language and how it's been written,
Yeah.
There is a lot of, I mean, Thomas Hardy writes it different, and off late, like if you look at the language, there's a mix
Yes.
of English and Hindi sometimes, or English
Yes.
and local language.
Yes.
Like, what do you think about the writing? Has it changed its form in that
Yeah.
sense to meet the thing, and
Yeah.
or
Yeah. I mean, sure, it's a good question. Um, um, I, yeah, there was, you see, it all kind of begins with famously with Salman Rushdie and what was called chutneyfication. And I mean, he kind of unshackles English. He writes more sinuous sentences. He starts writing more expansive sentences that try and kind of mirror the color and the diversity and the noise and the kind of um, 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 the explosion of senses that India is. And I think Salman Rushdie tried to do a lot of that. And then a lot of people, obviously with influential books, you have a lot of copycat novels, which is also fine because they all help create a literature. And at that time, we had quite a few, I mean, there was Mukul Keswan's for Looking Through Glass, and there were quite a few doing that kind of chutneyfication. And then I think a lot of it has also come in from um, um, advertising, which was advertising started being the pioneers of doing mixing Hindi and English. And even say a simple line like Domino's hungry kya, I mean, that has
yeah,
become part of our thing now. That is classic English. And the advertising guys started doing it really early on. And I just remember that back in when private news had just started on I think Star or one of these Z, there used to be this incredible English news, and two lines would be in English and two lines would be in Hindi, and it was odd even to us. I mean, and then they dropped it, but that was the most bizarre experiment I saw. Um, but I think that sort of thing has worked far better in cinema. I mean, I think the dialogues in our films have improved a fair bit, and they don't kind of sound like those filmy dialogues anymore, and they're trying to capture actual speech. And when you're trying to capture actual English speech, I think the visual medium works much better. because ultimately English you will lose some sort of dialogue. Although we all try and use some words to give it that local feel, depending on where you're setting your story. It'll be different if you're writing in English even, and say setting a story in Chennai, but it'll be different if you're setting it in Allahabad. So I suppose we do use words to put local flavor in. But I think a lot of this bilingualism, I have no problem with it, but I think Chetan Bhagat has also done it. But um, a lot of it, because it's dialogue, it works much better, say in advertising or in cinema, where you can, where you don't have to kind of write it out, and you can speak it, and then the spoken speech is, it's captured much better in that medium. But it certainly began with Rushdie, and I think you can overdo it as well. But it's not about writing correct English. I mean, we are all bio trilingual, and so when we write English, different languages are blending together in our head, even if you're writing in one language. And there's something very magical about that. And even if you're not overtly bilingual in your writing, I think this interplay of languages that happens naturally in your head uh, anyway gives a unique flavor to the kind of English we write. Or say with a Hindi writer also, it's not like Hindi writers don't read in English, and so all these things influence each other in your head. So yeah, that's something about the English. And
Yeah, I think everybody is doing that now. Thank you,
yeah.
Nivedita. We have a question in the chat box by Mrs. Kerman. She said, was it easier for you to expand on your own concept or work on a concept suggested by a potential publisher? What is easier?
Yeah, both are okay, because sometimes, like with the drinking anthology, it was a great idea. And I think it just happened because I'd edited an anthology earlier and I'd built some sort of a reputation for drinking. So the editor thought of me, she put two and two together. But I think what happens is that, look, I mean, if someone has an idea, that's also great. If it's because you have the freedom, more or less, to then do whatever you want to with the book. But like with Eunuch Park and Butterfly, these were all Butterfly also, I kind of came up with that idea along with my agent. So sometimes you can work alongside someone, like if you have a good agent, then you can work alongside, and you both kind of talk to each other and figure out what exactly you were trying to write on, like with Butterfly. So he made me narrow down from a general India book to write about your generation, and that helped me. That focus helped me. Although then I felt, look, I'm not that young, and you kind of pigeonholing me into this youth Chetan Bhagat thing. But then it did make sense, because um yeah, but and also nowadays I think it's easier, if you're talking totally in pragmatic terms, to work out a book earlier with your publisher, because then you're guaranteed something. Whereas if you write it and then you send it, more often than not they will say, ki, oh no, and so it's, if you want to be tactful, it's always a little better to get your contract maybe in the when you've written half or maybe one fourth of your book. um I mean, but although I must say that writing a book is more fun than writing proposals. I mean, it took me a year to write the Butterfly proposal. It was good. I mean, it gave me a good advance. There was an auction amongst publishing houses. So, look, writing is also a business. And if you're going to think about surviving as a writer, these are things you'll have to do. You'll have to work with publishers, and you'll have to pitch them things. You'll have to sell them things. You'll have to kind of anticipate what kind of thing they like. And so, yeah, I mean, it's less magical than it's made out to be. I mean, when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of publishing, so it's like a business. It's like a business. It's a business like any other. So yeah,
Actually, we have a lot of questions here.
yeah,
So, a little quick replies to a few of them.
yeah,
How do you come up with a unique factor of your ideas, making sure you don't end up with a cliched writing by Aishwarya Menon?
yeah. Thanks, Aishwarya. No, this is an excellent question, because this is the thing, because it's very easy to do cliche writing. And well, it takes nothing, because if you sit down to write, in fact, only cliches will flood your head. there are so many ready-made phrases, and these are the ready-made phrases. There was a wonderful book by Baudelaire called The Dictionary of Accepted Ideas, which are things like weather, eternal topic of W for weather, eternal topic of conversation. I think, Martin Amis had a book of essays called War Against Cliche. So I think one has to break out of these cliches and these accepted ideas, and just to say a simple thing, and how not to fall into the trap of just a cliche. The sun was high in the sky. I mean, you shouldn't. I think it takes time. That's the thing, and that's why writing, you have to have the patience, because you will sit and just to write that one sentence might take you about half an hour. Well, but when it's taking you half an hour, and you might have gone for a little walk, and you might be getting a little stressed, but well, you have to keep avoiding that. Every word you choose, every sentence you write, and the only way you can do that is by slowing down, and being aware of the cliche. If you're aware of the cliche, then that's half the battle won. Then tell yourself, look, there must be another way of expressing this without using the same phrase. I mean, when we describe the sun, we always use this word, or when we describe this, and say, our news is totally full of that, right? Ready-made phrases, like people will say at this point of time, or they will say number one, number two, and number three, and I mean, so I mean, it's just a simple example. You can say something else, and at this point in time, when you're speaking, it's fine. But I think when you're writing, how to avoid cliches, being very, very, very aware of what you're writing, and constantly thinking that this is the obvious way of saying it, and this is the obvious way of writing this, and what could be a less obvious way of expressing this. And it's a simple thing, but you have to constantly tell yourself that this is too easy. And with a lot of writing that you see on Facebook and things, you can see that it's just a lot of ready-made phrases. Like in pop songs, you have just ready-made phrases. You walk out the door, and and my heart is on the floor, and and every pop song. But then, good writing is not, it's a little better than the pop song. So I think I think you have to be a little more careful of every word you choose, and you have to constantly ask yourself, how do I write this differently? And that can take a lot of time, and it can become it can become painful, but then one has to go through that, because once you finally end up with a different way of expressing it, you will see the difference. The difference is just there in the finished product, and the difference will be apparent to the reader. The reader might not know what techniques you've used, and but that freshness the reader will get that sense, and you will be able to feel that in the feedback. So it's ultimately very fulfilling, but it takes time. I mean, you just constantly just ask yourself, how can I say this in a less obvious way? And there must be, but at the same time, don't make it too convoluted, because look at writers like R.K. Narayan. I mean, they wrote so simply. There's nothing really. Even Naipaul, he has a vocabulary of 20 words. In 20 words, he's written. He's won the Nobel Prize. So your vocabulary. So this doesn't mean that you kind of build a very complex vocabulary. This doesn't also mean that you start writing very purple prose or very convoluted sentences, or or कि मैं बहुत बना के लिखूंगा या लिखूंगी. So इतना भी वो the simpler. So there is it's again a tightrope. It's about simplicity. Learn from Narayan that you don't have to get too fancy. But then Narayan doesn't write in cliches, and so Narayan, I've always suggested as someone anyone can pick up and learn from Narayan. Yeah.
आपने बोला मैं सुन के लिया इसके बाद मुझे फेवर करने मत बोल one last question should we expect any new book from you anytime
Priyanka,
soon?
we can just take one last question and then
Yeah.
Are you writing something new right now?
Yeah. I am someone is talking.
Someone's unmuted. I am trying to get
Monica's thing is unmuted. No, this muted. I don't know. No. So I couldn't hear you. Yeah.
It's about are you writing something new?
Via Indian. I'm writing something new. I'm working on a new book of stories. Well, it was called Humiliation earlier, and I thought I would write around this theme. But at the moment, I'm in the process of adding more stories, and maybe the title will change, and I might kind of scrap the theme altogether. But there is that, and then there is another a novel that I'm working on called The Eternal Tenant, which is about this place I lived in Delhi for about 13 years, which is a very interesting kind of space with all kinds of people living there, and it was a little unconventional, with a completely nutty landlord. And it's a, we often write about what we know best, and it's about this guy who moves in as a tenant and really never moves out, so it's The Eternal Tenant. So that one's set in Delhi, and the others are stories, and these stories have become a little longer than the stories in Yunak Park, so which were about an average 10 pages each. So this time, because you can kind of write very short stories, and you can start experimenting with the longer story form. And so in this, which is tentatively titled Humiliation, these new stories, I mean, the stories have become a little longer. There are short stories as well, but I think I just wanted to experiment with the long story, because that allows you to kind of, within the story form, but I think the more I kind of read my own things, I prefer the shorter stories than the, but yeah. So I mean, I think more fiction is on the way. And there's also something on Indian philosophy that I've been wanting to write for a very long time. So this is an idea that's been with me for about, since I did philosophy about 20 years, 25 years. And because philosophy is the subject I was trained in college, and also a little bit in Oxford. So I do want to write something on the six schools of Indian thought, because something very accessible to the lay reader, and something that brings this very exciting system of Indian philosophy to, people who might be proud Indians, but they have no clue of that. We were a civilization which had some incredible debates, and whether you talk about the Nyaya logic school, or the Vaisheshik Samkhya, the school of atomists, the Vedant, the Buddhists, the Jains. Within that, there are schools. They had very exciting debates. So this is, when I'm done with my fiction, I want to write a kind of scholarly, but also accessible to the layperson, and bring these ideas and bring them together in one volume, a kind of history of Indian philosophy. So yeah, these are a couple of things that I have in mind. But as someone asked me something about why are Indian publishers so reluctant to accept, I think Mahesh asked why are Indian publishers reluctant to accept short stories. I really don't know. So, so, but I think a lot of this also has to do with. I think very few editors are now staying within the book trade. So what happens is that you have editors who become, say, the editor of the Sunday section in the newspaper. From the Sunday section of the newspaper, they suddenly become commissioning editor in a publishing house, which is a very different ball game. So I think I don't. I mean, yeah, but this is not just a problem here, but it's a problem everywhere. That I think a certain quality of literariness is going out of the profession, and which is a bit sad. But it's it's not that, I mean, literature always attracts good people, so new people keep coming in. But I have a feeling people change their jobs also a lot now. Because earlier you have one editor who's been in the trade for, like, say, 25, 30 years. Now you have a lot of people quitting publishing, coming into publishing, which is also fine. I mean, there's more sorry,
Options.
but yeah, that was about why Indian publishers are so reluctant to accept short stories. I mean, the standard thing, all publishers will say,
Yeah.
which readers deny, that stories don't sell, and readers want to escape into a long narrative, which means that if it's long form, then whoa, you buy one book and then you escape into that world. Within a story, readers find it hard. This is what the publishers have always thought across the world, but which often when you meet readers, they don't have this problem. Because look, storytelling is been with us forever. I mean, telling stories is the most elementary thing we do. I mean, my grandma would tell me stories. I mean, so, but when you turn it into a business model, the publishers always say that, look, our reader wants to escape into a novel, whereas stories keep, and the stories are difficult, because they end suddenly, and you like, but iske saath kya hua, and then what happened with that? But the story doesn't really go into all that. I mean, the story often leaves a situation at a certain point, and leaves the rest to your imagination. So the reader has to work a little bit on that, and it's thought out. It's not like the author ran out of ideas. It's just that you decided to cut it off there. So I think it's a slightly difficult form for some readers, but that's I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really nice, having this wonderful questions from the audience as well, because
Absolutely.
I know there are a number of other questions which we are getting in our personal chats as well, but because of the time shortage, we will not take that up. Maybe we can, send those questions personally to you.
Okay, sure. I
Can
can
you
answer them.
mute? Yeah, Priyanka, can you mute everyone here, because Jayanti's food is there and she's unmuted herself. Yeah. Okay, so it was really a wonderful session with Shri Palash Mehrotra ji. We got a beautiful insight into the writing of his genre, what he likes to write. He was talking about the short stories and his journey throughout his journey of writing, how he took up writing as his profession, his career, and how he is flourishing and connecting with himself in giving writing a different voice and language to his thoughts and ideas. That was really beautiful. We thank you a lot, sir, for giving away your time and giving us knowledge and information on writing and giving advices to the young authors and writers here. A big thank you to PKF in association with Sri Cement. Thank you to our venue partners, Redison, our media partners, Lokmat, and all the SRs women of Nagpur who are here with me. We thank you, each and everyone here, and a big thank you to the audience who were with us throughout this session and were very active in listening and asking the questions as well. Thank you, each and everyone here, and thank you so much, sir, once again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and thank you so much for allowing me to talk about my writing rather than some big issues of the day, which fiction writers are not really experts on. So no, wonderful,
Amazing,
wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you, PKF,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so
Jyoti.
much, sir.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. All right,
Thank you,
bye,
sir.
bye, bye, bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.